Happy New Year. I wish you once again a wonderful 2024. And hopefully in 2024, for every one of you that is in the academia, you will be able to write 3 manuscripts. 3 manuscripts. That will give me a lot of joy. If you're in the academia, 3 manuscripts should be your target every year. Not just 3 manuscripts, but 3 manuscripts in a Scopus Index journal. And for us on this platform, in a Q1, Q2 journal. And if you're not in the academia and you've participated on the Manuscript Writing Hub, 1 manuscript 2024 would be a huge success. So once again, welcome to this series of training. We did a revision last week. Today we'll be talking about writing the results section. It's a series, and once we end this series, 12-week series, we will start again. All over again. I apologize, I would not be able to share recordings. I don't keep recordings. My university is supporting me through this process, so recordings don't come to me. If they shared recordings with me, I'll share with you, but I do not commit to being able to share recordings with you. One of the things I also encourage you to do is, if you want to learn a lot more about what we're doing, go to Google, go to YouTube, read, because it reinforces what you've heard from me. Many times I listen to other people present the things I've presented and I pick up a new gem of information. You could also do the same. So Google and read more, thereby reinforcing the lessons you've learned today. I do also share that these sessions I am writing from my personal experience. Many of you may be aware that I have written quite a number of manuscripts in my academic years. I have written over 340 manuscripts and have learned to be able to write in a way that I do not get rejects anymore. If I do get a reject, it's because they find my manuscript not suitable for the journal. But once they do read, rarely do I get a reject. I also feel very comfortable to share with you because the first manuscript I'd written in my life, on my own, the very first, went through a Q1 level journal review without sending back to me to correct. That was my first ever that I solely wrote. And it went through a Q1 level journal, straight to publication with no request for. It was like perfect. In my entire writing life, like I said, I've written 340 papers more. I've only had 2 such experiences. One, the first paper I ever wrote, and another one maybe in the last 3 years. Why am I telling you this story? It is very possible for you to write manuscripts. It has an ABC to it. Just as everybody learns ABC and start learning to put the A and B together to write words, put the words together to write phrases, and put the phrases together to write sentences, you can do exactly the same. And not only would you write manuscripts well, you can write in Q1, Q2 journals. Q1, Q2 journals are not limited to people from high-income countries. You can. And once you learn the ABCs, it becomes applicable to every form of journal. So I'm sharing with you my own standards that I've learned. I've shared with you my goals. My own goal, standards about manuscript submission. My own goal is never to submit below a Q2 journal. Scopus, well, excellent to choose Scopus, but within even the Scopus, I go for a Q2, Q1 journal. I go for a Q2 journal because many Q2 journals are aspiring to go to Q1. So it's a matter of time they will get into Q1. And for those that are in Q1, they aspire to stay in Q1. So they continue to maintain high standards. Why do I go to Q2, Q1? You can be sure that once you're in Q2, Q1, they do very good review of your manuscripts. Very quality feedbacks they give you. And once you get quality feedbacks and you use it to rewrite your manuscripts, you feel comfortable that your manuscript will become a reference manuscript. Your success as a researcher who is writing manuscripts is not the number. I repeat, it is not the number. It is the fact that people find your manuscript of value enough to build new knowledge on it, to build new knowledge around it. So they find the things you write, oh, this is important. Let me see if this is replicable in my country, in my situation, in my population. Let me see if this answers a foundation that I can now refer to and build on. This is the success of you as a writer. And therefore, if you are writing and you look 2, 3, 4, 5 years and your manuscript is not referenced, that should be a worry for you. It is not the numbers you are after. A good academic is that you are addressing a gap in knowledge or validating existing knowledge. So let's go for the section for today. Please note that in your manuscript, you would have written quite a number before you got to results. You've written your introduction, you've written your methods, and here you're reporting your methods as your results. If you had been following this series, one of the things I do share with you is that your result is oftentimes the shortest part of your manuscript. The longest part, the most detailed part, the most important part, the most powerful part of your manuscript is your method section. Your method section is the section that makes anybody determine whether your paper is rejected or retained. Every other section can be modified. Every other section, they can tell you to do this. They can even tell you to rewrite the results this way or that way. But once the methodology has a fault, because it cannot be repeated, they would reject it. If your methodology is good and you've generated your result, they can ask you to rewrite your result or generate another form of output from your result. But the methodology must be strong. Once again, the result is usually, you can write 3 pages of methodology and have half a page of results. The paper I was dealing with yesterday, my tables is about 4 or 5 pages long. My result is less than 2 pages, less than 1.5 pages actually. So result is short. You note that, but there are ways and critical things that must be found in the results. The result is answering the study objective. You focus on the study objective. I've said it here multiple times. Writing a manuscript is different from writing a thesis. You need to appreciate that. Your manuscript is different from writing a thesis. So you must master the difference between that. And the results section is one of such difference. What is your objective? If your objective is looking for the association between age and height, your result tells you age and height. You don't go shopping for other things that your result is showing that may be of interest. Focus. Answer your objective. That's what your result is. Your answering the answer to your objective. So usually the result, that about 3 sections that you might be able to find in a result. The first section is describing your study variables. You tell us what the sample size is and those variables of interest that you have identified in your methodology. You report on them descriptively. I apologize once again. At this time, I am a lot more skewed to biomedical or quantitative results than qualitative. But I would always try and interject the qualitative results also as I talk about this. So usually, the first paragraph is a description of your variables. What is it? So you had your sample size was this. Did you meet your target sample size? So if you are targeted 100 and you recruited 99, so you will let us know it is 100 out of the sample size. So you had your recruitment rate is 99%. This is very powerful information, because once your recruitment falls short of your sample size by 15 to 20%, it means your study is underpowered. I repeat that. Once your sample size falls short of your anticipated sample by 15 to 20%, there's a problem. It tells the readers that this study is underpowered. And you must be comfortable with what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with that. You couldn't recruit, because it's not likely that what is left there is completely representative of what you should have collected in terms of the distribution of your sample. And once it's underpowered, there are 2 things that will show. One, if you're doing an inferential analysis, you'll start to see that your confidence interval is wide. Even though you get a significant statistic, you might even get 0.001. Anybody that is serious about results, they start to look at that your confidence interval is wide. Once your confidence interval is wide, you do not get the number, you fall short of your sample size by 15 to 20%. There is a problem of representation. You can report the result, but you must acknowledge that this is a study limitation. Why am I saying this? Remember, once again, when you're doing research, it's not about you. It has nothing to do with you and your personality and your ego. It's about finding an answer to a result, to a problem, or answers if we're doing qualitative. In quantitative, there's an assumption, there's an ultimate truth out there. And we as researchers are trying to get that truth. Your result is one of the stepping stones for others to build to get that ultimate truth. And therefore, it's important that you report truth as generated from your results, from your research, or more like facts that is generated from your results. It's not about you. It's not about you being able to achieve statistical significance. No, it has nothing. It's about we as a world, that your result is going to contribute to helping us being healthy. So if you did not meet your sample size, that's okay. Let us know. We know it's underpowered. What underpowered means is also telling us that this research should be replicated to be able to validate the results you have generated from an underpowered study. The thing, if you do have the power to do it, many times you don't, if you are doing a cross-sectional study, or if you are doing a longitudinal study, is to show that the sample that's still retained does not differ significantly from the population that it was recruited from. So this, although my study was supposed to generate 100, I ended up generating 70. You already know that 70 is underpowered because this is 30% less than the anticipated sample size. I now show that the profile of the 70 is representative of the target population. Okay, if I can do that, then it gives people confidence that we can run with this result. Otherwise, this result is only going to be suggestive, and somebody else has to do another to be able to verify what you have done. I hope that has a little bit of clarity, but please feel free to ask me questions as we go on. So your first paragraph is this descriptive, and that is why it's very powerful. You know your sample size. You've already done that in your methodology. You know the sample you recruited, and so we know, how well you met your target. When I'm talking about ethics later on, you'll see also that when you do your sample size, what you generate is also maximum sample size, not minimum. It is therefore expected that even if you over-recruit, you should never over-recruit more than 20% of your generated sample size. Why? Because this has ethical implications. What's the ethical implication? Please note that in research, there is no research whatsoever that is free of harm. I repeat, there is no research whatsoever that is free of harm. And therefore, you must justify why you are exposing people to harm. There are three types of harm. It might be minimum, moderate, or maximum. An ethics committee are trained to be able to compute what harm goes with the study, and what amount of harm it may be appropriate for the level of study you're doing. So if every study comes with some form of harm, albeit it's minimal, and you can generate your results recruiting 100 participants, why would you recruit 101 when the extra one does not improve the power of your study? It does not improve the quality of your result, yet you have exposed this one person to harm that is not needed, of no value for that research. It is for this reason that when we calculate sample size, It is maximum sample size. You therefore must use the appropriate sample size calculation formula to get the appropriate sample size for your study. And if for any reason you do recruit more, do not exceed 20%. When you calculate your sample size, you have taken into consideration everything: fallout rate, retention rate, follow-up, all those things ends up getting you your sample size. And therefore, when you get onto the field for whatever reason and you recruited extra, please limit it. Otherwise, you will have critical challenges when you submit your result. I've raised this because I do know in practice, many people, you've collected your data and then you now go back to calculate sample size and try to fit it in. It doesn't work in the world where we're going. And remember, we're targeting Q1, Q2 journals. So we need to know the rules that governs their operation and their thinking and the review process. So you have reported your descriptive. Remember, once again, I started that your descriptive is your sample size. I recruited 300 out of the anticipated 100. My recruitment rate was 70%, 71%. Once is lower than 85% of your sample size or 80%, then there's a problem with power, and that's what I spent time to explain. All the variables of interest, which are your outcome variable as well as your explanatory variable, otherwise the independent or dependent variables, are the variables of interest that you should report. Okay, so you report them descriptively. You don't report. I will talk about results. When you're reporting your result and you have a table, you just report, a summary. It's a summary. For example, you recruited 100 participants. 80 were females. You don't say, I recruited 80 females, 20 males. It doesn't make sense. You already told us your sample size is 100. You recruited 80. We definitely know, because in your methodology, you've told us that when you look at sex, you looked at sex binary, male and female. So if you recruited 100 and you recruited 80, there's no gainsaying it. The remaining is 20. You don't need to write it. 80 female, 20 males. You did socioeconomic strata. You looked at low, middle, and high. If the critical reference is the low, then you report the low. You don't need to report high and middle. You just take one of the variables, because the table is there and people can refer to the table and see the rest. It's just a summary, critical, but all the variables would be reported of significance. Once again, the variables of significance will always be your dependent and dependent, or your outcome and explanatory variable. The next paragraph is now the report of your test of associations, like the report of your t-test or the report of your chi-squares. What is the results relating to your objective? Remember again, your focus is on the objective. If you recall the beginning of this manuscript training, the objective is key. The objective lets us know what it is. The objective defines your methodology. Once again, your objective is defining your result. This is why you must take time to ensure that your objectives is smart. It's smart, measurable, accurate, specific. We know what you're looking for. It's a very, very disturbing, unacceptable result method when the variables do not already show from your introduction. You go into the methodology, it's not there. And then in your results, you start to see results and you're wondering, where did this one come from? Age care. But he didn't say he's looking for age. He didn't say he was looking for income. He didn't say he was looking for blood pressure. Well, because it's not there in the introduction, it's not there in the methodology. And then you get to result, you now start telling us the result of stool samples, urine samples, the result of the length of hair. These are very shocking things, and it derails. Usually for me, once I get to this point, I stop reviewing and I just send it back. So at the test of association, you're not telling us that the result of your associations. The last paragraph is your inferential analysis for those that go to do regression analysis. Okay. Many times when you do your test of association, it's for you to generate the variables that go into your regression analysis, and then you report on your regression analysis. You report once again those things that answers your objective. Many times in your regression analysis, you would have confounders in your regression analysis. Okay, so because we were doing the regression, you put your confounders, you will see the results of the confounders. You do not report the result of your confounders. Once you start reporting the results of your confounders, you start to do what is called table 2 fallacy. It's called table 2 fallacy. I repeat, table 2 fallacy. Please write it and go read about it. Google what is table 2 fallacy. It's table 2 fallacy. You don't report it. It's supposed to be silent. You don't report the results of your confounders. You just report the results of your association between the dependent and independent variable, or your outcome and explanatory variable. Please, once again, when you report your results, please focus on point 1, which is answering your objective. That is why I highlighted here. For those that do qualitative study, the first paragraph is also the description of your variables, of your samples, what their age is, their distribution, and many times you put it in a table. That's very powerful. You must describe the profile of the study participants, because in that profile, you start to understand, the reader starts to understand who they are dealing with in terms of their response. Okay? For descriptive variables, you also do know that your result is reporting the themes and the sub-themes of your analysis. You must come out with clarity in the first paragraph what the themes are. You had 4 themes, list it. You had 3 themes, list it. You had 5 themes, list it. The themes must be listed in the first paragraph. And thereafter, you talk about, what you found when you're reporting your themes. Please note that when you're reporting your themes, in the Q1, Q2 journals, you find out that the quotes you must use it sparingly. When you write and it's so heavy quoted, it's distractive, it's not powerful. When you write a quote, the quote must be saying something unique, something not anybody can say, something that could only have come from your study or from your analysis, not something, I don't like sweets, except that statement is powerful and different. Bring out those things. Once you're writing your themes and you're putting your quotes to support the themes, 1, 2, maximum 3 quotes is okay. And each of those quotes must be saying something different and powerful. All right. Many times within the teams, you do have sub-teams. If you do have sub-teams you're reporting, it's oftentimes better to pull it together, state the things, and if you have sub-teams, maybe just do one powerful quote if there's something that is being said that has not been said before. Focus your reporting of your quotes on those things that are powerful, that are new information, not things that has already been said before. So let's go to representing how to represent your results. Once again, I've said this before, the result is usually the shortest part of your manuscript. The paragraph reports something that is specific, and in the result, the first is just the descriptive, the second is the test of association, the third is the report of the logistic regression, if that's what you do. No matter how novel that you're seeing, please only report the answer to your study objective. Don't go parabolating. Your study is looking at the association between head and neck. Please report head and neck. Don't go and say head and eye. You're seeing something head and eye and ear and nose and ear and throat. So forget it. Just focus on your study objective. For Q1, Q2 level journals, 5 tables is the maximum you should go. Many times the journals will tell you the limits. 5 tables. By the time you're writing 5 tables, more than 5 tables, believe me, I can tell you that if you collapse those tables, you probably will not get more than 2. For me now, for most of the manuscripts I write, I just write 1 table. It's just 1 table because I can write the descriptive there in the first paragraph, the column. I can show you the bivariate and I can show you the inferential analysis. We just saw many of my manuscripts in that it's just one table. When it is a lot, it's two. Okay, but I've just recently done one exceptional huge paper, and the number of tables there are about 7 or 8, but it's a powerful paper. I worked with this guy from Health Economics UNA. It's good paper. I couldn't have done that. And please note that when you write your results, your tables or your figure or whatever it is that is representing must stand alone. Must be able to stand alone, which means that you must take time to label appropriately. And I'll be talking about how you label. You must label appropriately so that if I pick your paper, when I buy Bolly, I love Bolly, I love Bolly. Bolly smoked, Bolly smoked plantain. I'll tell you one story about it sometime in the future. I love Bolly. So if I go and I buy my Bolly as usual, and I pick up this paper, I should be able to tell what this result is telling me based on reading the label. It's not enough to say social demographic profile. And I'll show you when we're going forward. Figures are also very powerful where you can use figures, because tables and figures help to reduce the narrative. Even in qualitative, I'm sure when we'll have opened the space for questioning, even in qualitative, there are places where you can put figures. My last 2 qualitative papers, I had figures pulling things together. Okay, no, not figures, I mean tables, to summarize things that necessarily may not be in the narrative of my results. And I tell you, even when I write opinion pieces or perspectives, there are ways that these tables come to make it powerful. I have a colleague, Professor Nadia Samagodu. She sees the table in everything we write. Like once she's looking for tables. She's producing table. I also have another friend, Pierre Tladeni. When she's looking at it, she's seeing figures. Before you know it, she's created a figure out of it. And I noticed that when you put this, it becomes very attractive for people. Remember that the way we read are different. Some of us are visual. So tables and figures are a lot more appealing than the narrative. So once you can put it, because it helps to reduce the number of words, it engages people better in a summary form. And we'll be talking about how to do that shortly. So when we're talking about visual aids, once again, it helps to summarize and reduce the length of a narrative, making it concise, and it also enhances clarity about what we want to say. Most times we use tables. Tables is the most commonly used form of visual aid if it's not overused. Figures are not as often used, but we'll talk about figures in terms of graphs, photographs, drawing diagrams, and we'll show what kind of visual aids we can use. So this table summarizes, what otherwise you should represent. If you're sharing raw data, a table or a list might be more appropriate. If you're showing interactions, line graphs might be better. If you're want to draw differences, a bar graph may be better. If you're trying to show a complex relationship or spatial configuration or pathways, a diagram may be more otherwise appropriate. If you're doing a flow chart, it's showing a sequential order of things. And if you classifying information, a pictograph might be better. If you're doing electric circuit, of course, a schema is better. If you're describing a process, a flow chart or a pictogram might be better. If you're doing contrast, pictogram, pie charts, bar charts are good. If you're showing changes in state, a line graph is better. If you're doing proportion, a pie chart is better. If you're showing relationship, a line chart or graph might be okay. When you're describing causation, a pictogram might be better. So let's look at this. First, the table that we usually use most often, there are expectations of how to draw a table. There are expectations. There are rules governing how to draw a table. A scientific table usually would have no vertical lines in it. And the only horizontal lines you have are 3. Underneath the title, the second, beneath the headings, and then the last one at the bottom. If you're going to put footnotes, you put it after the third. That's all the horizontal lines there are. There are no vertical lines in a scientific table. And once again, tables should stand alone. The label must tell us exactly what it is. prevent overuse of abbreviation in tables. When there's an abbreviation in table, make sure that there's a footnote explaining the abbreviation. Okay, so let's look at this table. These two tables that you see are exactly the same table, but I'll tell you one of the challenges with it. First of all, look at that table. You will see that there are just 3 lines, or maybe 4, but 3 lines basically. One, let's look at one immediately under the title. The second one is immediately below, the variables, the label of the variables. In this case, there are 2 variables, and the third is at the bottom of the table. That's usually all the lines there are. But when you look at these tables, it's the same thing. But if you ask me, the first one and the second one is exactly the same. It's exactly the same information they're sharing. But if you ask me between the first and the second one, which one do I find a lot more aesthetically pleasing that I can engage with? I'll tell you it's the second one, because the variables are there and it's easy to read what it's saying, rather than this long one that has multiple variables in the column and very few variables, in the row. Let the length of the column be shorter than the row. That's what this is saying. It's easy to engage with it. The second thing that I think is significantly important, remember I noted that once you have a table, it should be a standalone as much as possible. This table can really be standalone because the acronyms are just too much. It's just filled with acronyms. And there is no footnotes to the acronyms. So this table is not readable. Nobody can read it except the person that wrote it. So if where you can avoid acronyms, avoid it. And then you use it below. My editor taught me, and I thought it's very powerful. Even after that, I can write a whole chapter without an acronym. You only use acronyms when you have used that same word 3 times or more. 3 times or more, I repeat it. You use an acronym only when you have used that word 3 times or more. If you're using it once, there's no need for an acronym. If you used it twice, don't use an acronym. If you have used it 3 times, don't use an acronym. If you've used it more than 3 times, then use an acronym. Okay, there's no need for acronyms all over the place. And I see it so much. I work in the field with the world of HIV, and I see even when they're talking to you, normally they just use acronym. We'll be having a section on communication, and we'll be discussing this. An effective table title, so let's look at this table, must tell this information about content of the table. So look at these 2 titles. Somebody writes the title as Socio-Demographic Profiles of NIMA Staff. That's not descriptive. A better title is to say Age, Sex, and Socioeconomic Profile of NIMA Staff in 2019. This is a descriptive title. And please note, every time you have a table, please put in a bracket the N of the total subject. This is the way that title is seemingly complete. You must write what it is and end it with a table in it. Okay? And then one of the things you must note is that when you have multiple tables, don't change the order in which you are listing the variables. If in table 1, the age came first, sex came second, socioeconomic profile came third, in table 2, 3, 4, 5, age must come first, sex must come second, socioeconomic profile must come third. There must be consistency in table presentation. If when you wrote age, you wrote age as capital AGE. When you're writing it in all of them, put it AGE. Don't change terminologies. In table 1 is socioeconomic profile. Table 2 is socioeconomic status. Table 3 is socioeconomic strata. That's changing. You're saying the same thing using different words. No, you must consistently use the same word throughout. This is one of the big things about I tell people that you have to have native intelligence when you're writing. Once you're changing terminologies when you're writing, you're fitting the mind of the reviewer. It starts to become confused. There's socioeconomic status there. Why is this socioeconomic strata here? And then the third, it's not socioeconomic profile. You see, you are affecting his thinking, and it is not affecting it in a way that is to your advantage. Or maybe when you're writing it, you write age first. When you're reporting age, sex, socioeconomic profile, the second time is socioeconomic profile, you write first and age next. You're affecting the logic of the person's mind. And in that confusion, it's not to your favor. It's often not to your favor. Once you have a flow of reporting, follow that flow. It engages the mind of the readers and helps the mind of the readers to flow with you, rather than confusing this person and making this person go back. This is very, very important. Line graphs, for example, once again, when you're looking at continuous variable that is showing movement, line graphs are appropriate. Usually, line graphs are used for continuous variables, not for discrete variables. It's continuous variables. Okay, it depicts trends. Bar graphs are very good, but you do know that bar graphs can either be horizontal or vertical also. Bar graphs compare size and magnitude of discrete data. Continuous data is line, discrete is very important. Bar graphs do discrete. And they're more effective when they run in the direction in which people are expecting to see them. So if you're talking about speed, then it's better to use the horizontal bars, distance, time, speed. When you're talking about weight, height, then use the vertical, because that's the direction it's expected to go. Pie chart is also very important. They show relationships in terms of number in parts of a whole. Okay, so, these are examples. You can draw it in as many fanciful ways that you want, but this is how it's represented. Pictographs are very powerful. Okay, they are bar charts that are composed of pictures. You see a lot of them. Many more and more these days, you start to see heat maps. That lets you see where this is. Even in Nigeria, if you have a graph of Nigeria, if you have a graph of a country, you can use heat maps or pictogram. In one, you can use symbols to represent what you're talking about. For example, somebody says access to electricity in Africa, and then you use the 25% using ounces, but then using different colors as you see at the bottom. Or when you're doing world maps, you use the heat graphs. It helps to represent subject matter when you use pictogram. Very powerful. Scatter graphs, for those of us that do a lot of statistical representation, you can use correlation analysis, and a lot more with scatter graphs. Just a few more words. Many times journals are specific on the request for use of visuals. Some will say if you have color, you pay for it. I've had to pay for color graphs. Some would say just only 2 figures are allowed. Some would say just 5. Please look for the journal's request specifications and follow it. Okay. And when you plan your data, and when you present your data, you give yourself the advantage of people quoting you or people moving your papers to systematic reviews and meta-analysis for those that do both quantitative and qualitative. It's very, very powerful. Even in qualitative data, you know that there are acrylic diagrams now that you can use to show the relationship between the variables. If you have such, use it. It's very powerful. One of the things I want to say for those that do biomedical studies or quantitative studies, for example, if you have age, you study the age of children 10 to 15 years old. When you're writing your table 1 and write the number of people for age 10, write the number of people for age 11, age 12, age 13, age 12. Don't lump them together, because many systematic reviews might just want to pull out the data from your age 10 or pull out the data from your age 15. And Toby, please, there's somebody scribbling, Ogumo Dedi or something. Please help me to check the person out. Thank you. All right. So write what you have. If you have data, present it. Don't model it up. Don't make it short. Present it. So if you have age 10 to 9, don't write age 10 to 9. Write 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. If you are presenting it short, write an appendix and show the entire data. This way people can quote your paper for many multiple reasons, including meta-analysis. Visual illustrations, once again, the indications for its use, like many pieces of your manuscript, they tell a story of their own independently, and they're part of the manuscript. And when it is not there, people should miss it. Once again, 5 illustrations per manuscript is okay. Many times you find out that you don't need as much. One of the things I've seen over my years of training is that people don't know how to merge tables into one. So a single table, they now write it out as 5 tables, whereas everything is just a single table. Once your row has the same variable and the column is also the same variable, that's just one table. Just split it into 5. It's just one table. Okay, but that comes also with skills. On that note, I'd like to say thank you and open up the space for 20 minutes of questions. Thank you for listening. Yeah, and if you have questions, yes, let me go into the chat box first. Thank you, Okerike Promise. I see your hands is up. Give me a minute. Let me quickly go into the chat box and see if I have a few questions. Let me take 1 or 2 questions from there, and then Okerike Promise, you can then ask your question. Doshima, good morning, Doshima. So really good to see you today. I missed you last week. You asked the question, you are simply changing the paradigm in research in some places. Oh, thank you. All right, that was a question. Hafiz Salami says, can you explain how we can convince our readers that our study is representative of a sample size, even if it is underpowered? All right, so what happens is that you show that the profile of your study or your study participant is still representative of the study of the target population. What happens when you sample is that you're saying that I am sampling out of the target population. All right. And so when you do what is called a probability sampling, which means you sample to represent the population, it is often a given or assumed that the profile of your study participant is the same profile of the study population. Once it is underpowered, what you're suggesting is that there might be a reason in your study that is making some people not to respond, or you can't get them. Maybe there is a population that you might have left unintentionally out. From the way you have recruited your study participant. Therefore, can you still hear me? Toby, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, excellent. Right, sorry, somebody called, so it was interrupted. So what you do, for example, is to show up a profile. For example, now let me be very specific at fees. So if I said I sampled people from Nigeria, in the profile of Nigeria, you find out that the high socioeconomic status is fewer than the middle, and the low is the bulk. Okay, and we have a profile. I don't know the profile, but let's say the Nigerian profile is that the high is 15%, the middle is 30%, and the low is 65%. I mean, I'm just using it as a sample. And that is my target population, Nigeria. I must be able to show that at the end of the day, my sample still represents, which shows that my high is still only 15, my middle is just 30, and my low is 65. Once that final sample is exactly as that, then you're okay. Because there's an assumption that if you had recruited the way you otherwise should have recruited, it should represent it, the profile should be like that. But now that you've recruited less, maybe you ended up recruiting more high socioeconomic, and your 15% may just have been completely lost from your low socioeconomic profile because of your sampling process. So that way, once it's underpowered, it also has the risk of being non-representative in its design. I've spent time to say a lot of things, but please let me know by saying a yes if you do understand what I said. Obeta says I was summarizing. I'm sorry I didn't summarize. Right, I hope you all saw my slides. Yewande is saying something like that you didn't see my slides that I was speaking to. Toby, did you see my slides as I was scrolling down?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Well,
all right.
I think I could just open up the mic for someone else to see if they also saw your slides.
Yeah, I'm sure Yewande. one of the participants saw my slide. I hope you did. Maybe it sorted itself later. Okay. All right, let me take one more.
Did, ma.
All right, excellent. Okay, then. And then Tolulope Shogbade, I'll take that and then I'll go to Promise. It says, I don't get what you mean by quote. Oh, well, usually when you do qualitative studies, you quote what people say. That's what a quote is, to support, the report of the teams that you brought up. So for people that do qualitative studies, they understand quote. It's, like, I don't know what it is. You quote what was said to support the teams that you are pulling out. It's a verbatim quote. This was what they said. This was what you profiled when you did your focus group discussion or your IDI, key informant interview, in-depth interview. I'm sorry about that, but I hope it makes meaning to you to look at. All right. I promise. Please unmute your mic and ask your question. Or Toby, please help me to unmute Promise mic so that he can ask his question. Thank you. I'll come back to the chat box after Promise question. Toby, please help Promise unmute his mic. Thank you.
Yeah, I've done that. Please, Promise, please kindly unmute yourself. I have given you permission to unmute.
All right. Let me go back to the chat box and then take if there are other questions. Blessing asks, how do I do a dummy table? A dummy table is a dummy table. Exactly. You just draw a table with no variables in it. That's a dummy table. Many times we do dummy tables. At least for me, when I work with my own students, I ask them to draw me dummy tables, which shows what they want to put in their rows and what they want to put in their columns. That's all. And then I validate the dummy tables before they go to do the analysis. So that's what the dummy table is. Exactly. You just draw a table without figures inside. That's what the dummy table is. Ugo is asking a question. It says, what happens when you say 5 objectives in a thesis and want to submit? When you have 5 objectives in a thesis, that's 5 manuscripts. If you take one objective and write a manuscript, one of the things I've seen many times is that people want to write their thesis into a single manuscript. It doesn't work. It truly does not work. You must be a very top researcher with experience. Well, top researcher, not like I'm saying you are 60 years old or 70 years old. You must have acquired skills to be able to write a manuscript with 2 objectives, less so 3 objectives. If you are writing a manuscript with more than 3 objectives, you can't write it because you would not pull the discussion together. You know that your objectives are often distinct. They're independent in themselves. So when you have a thesis with 5 objectives, that's 5 manuscripts. You can't write a thesis with 5 objectives and write one manuscript. It doesn't work. Even if you do everything and write 15 tables, you cannot write that discussion in a way that is meaningful. It will not pull together. It will not gel. So that's usually what it is. Of course, you may divide it into 2 if it's suitable. Well, of course, just like you noted, you're going to have 1,000,001 tables because you're saying multiple different things. When you're going to now link the discussion, you're going to have a challenge. So the best thing is focus one objective with the manuscript. And that's if you have described your manuscript objective. Each objective is distinct. It's distinct. If you're having objectives that are linking together, for example, you find these ones that you say, I want to describe the prevalence of A, the prevalence of B, then objective 3 is the association between A and B. Of course, that's one manuscript. That's not, I want to look at the prevalence of A, objective 2, prevalence of B, objective 3, the association between A and B. That's actually one objective. That objective is the association between A and B, because you could never have done association between A and B without looking at the prevalence, the proportions of A and B actually. So once you have that kind of objective and you say you have 3, actually that's just one paper. Okay, but when you have distinct objectives, actually, and you're pursuing distinct objectives, that's usually, objective 1. That 3 is actually one objective. Objective is to determine the association between A and B. That's one. There's no way you determine association between A and B without looking at the proportion of A and the proportion of B anyway. Okay. Could you please shed more light on teams and sub-teams? That will do a lot more. I can't shed light because it's a result. Teams are results that are generated from analysis of qualitative data. It's just what you ask is like asking me, can you shed light on variables? On variables, yeah, something like that. So once you do a qualitative analysis, you generate teams. You generate, people are saying so many things. You can group what they're saying into categories. Yes, maybe that would represent it. And each category is a team. So you did this and you found out that they were talking about gender, they were talking about age, and they were talking about sex. So that's 3 teams that emerged from my qualitative study. So you will now be able to write things that they said about gender, you write things that they said about age, you write things that they said about something, One of the things we'll do at the end is have 1 or 2 sessions on qualitative study. I think some other people also in technology, there's a way they also write their own piece of work, especially their results. We'll also have 1 session possibly dedicated to that. So if I can explain things, it's like categories of the finding. I think that might be more representative from that was generated from the analysis of your qualitative paper. So these categories of what you find is what you call teams. So if there are multiple categories, you might have smaller categories and the bigger category. The bigger category is the team and the smaller category is the sub-team. I think that will represent. But if there's anybody here that can help me answer that question, it would be a pleasure to hear you. You could just raise your hand and I'll call you to help me answer that question.
Prof, we have Promise back. He just raised his hands.
Okay, I'll come back to Promise in the next minute or 2. Please, more emphasis on rows and columns. May do know ye. And I would need a specific question. I'm not sure. If there's something you don't understand, it helps. Yeah. How about representing figures such as bar chart of a data already presented in a table? If you present a data in a table, you don't do another figure. There's only one presentation. It's either you're presenting your figures, your data as a figure or a table. You don't do 2 for the same figure. You don't do 2 representation of the same data. Not even in your thesis. You don't do 2 representation of the data. Thank you very much, Afis, for letting me know that you understood that. How can you explain on reports or report no response to a Google form? Yes, when you do a Google form, what happens is that you would find in your Google form the number of people. 2 things. You'll find in your Google form the number of people that hit your Google and the number of people that consented to take. If you're doing Google forms and there's no consent form, that's very wrong, very unethical. So you will know the number of people that accessed your form and the number of people that consented to take the form. So that is your response rate. Yes, that was what I was trying to catch, response rate. That's your response rate. So if 100 people hit your form and 20 people responded, that your response rate is 20. People do know that when you do online surveys, the response rate is usually low, about 20 to 27. I think 20 to 27. If you get 32, you're really top. So you must quote things to support. And that's why when you do Google form, you're not doing a probability sampling. That's a different ballgame on its own. So your non-probability sampling can never be representative. And there's no point. All you can generate from non-probability sampling is an hypothesis. You cannot say that you truly have an answer to a question through non-probability sampling techniques. It doesn't happen. When I'm talking about sample representation of the target population, it's after you have done the probability sampling. Okay, I hope that helps. Will there be something on meta-analysis? I don't know. I don't know. You saw the schedule. I don't think meta-analysis is on the schedule. Okay. Thank you. Oh, I've not been able to read. Okay, I'll read Sister Priska, I saw your mail. I'll read it shortly. Let me take the last question, Promise. We have 6 more minutes. Promise, do you want to ask a question? Okay, we have 2 hands now. Promise, please go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, I don't know, maybe I can answer it when I
Promise, your internet is really bad. I can't hear you.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
It's better, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I said, as I was saying, I'm so sorry. When I locked out, the questions had been addressed. My question had been addressed, but let me just put it out. When you were talking about something on, when you were talking about something on the results section, if you just write the result based on the objective that you have already outlined, it would be nice to if you have.
Promise, there's a bad echo. There's a very bad echo, so it's difficult to hear what you're saying. I don't know, maybe it's double, but there's a very bad echo. It's interfering with what you're saying, so it's difficult to hear you.
So, okay, is it better now?
Yes, your voice is louder, but the echo is still there. Let's go ahead. Yes.
Okay, let me just try and be snappy. I was saying that when you talked about results section, and if you found out so many things in your result that are outside your objectives, is it wise to make it into another manuscript?
Excellent. You make it into another manuscript. That's just excellent. Okay. One of the things that happens usually, and which I find very commonly is the problem, is that once people don't define their variable and non-variable, when there is no clarity about the objective, they start finding results that people can't relate with. So your objective is not clear, even to you. So when you see results, you are just looking, anyone that has p-value, you are interested in it, whereas that is not it. This is what I see is usually the problem. So you don't have clarity about your objective, you don't have clarity about your variables of study. Then when you get to result, anything that just shows association, you just jump on it. I remember it's usually very difficult to teach people, adults that have a mind of their own. I remember I have a mentee who does this. There's no clarity, today, at the beginning, dependent and your variable A is dependent, variable B is independent. Then when they are doing analysis, variable B now becomes dependent and variable. And I said they don't do things like this, but adults are adults. I let them do it. And then the reviewer will come back, they will throw away the manuscripts. That if you can learn, but this person I worked with for a long time keeps doing the same thing. After some time, just if you like it, why? And I feel the reason why the person continues is because they always get their manuscript published. But with me, I don't go to any journal. I go to Q1, Q2. They will reject it because there's no clarity. In another manuscript, in manuscript A can be dependent and B independent. In manuscript B can become dependent and A independent. And you can't put both of them in the same manuscript. That is different objective. And just like you said, Promise, in manuscript A, you can look at your covariate and it's showing a very interesting association with your dependent variable. In this manuscript A, it is a covariate or it is a confounder. You cannot report it and discuss it. No. You will now go to another paper and make that your covariate a dependent and independent variable and do it and report it as a secondary analysis of data, because that was not the primary objective of the study. Once it's a secondary analysis of data, everybody knows that a secondary analysis of data only generates hypothesis because the study was not powered for that. The sample size calculation was not powered for what you're finding, but it's an interesting thing. And you want to use it to generate hypotheses and encourage further studies. So yes, Promise, excellent thinking. Once you start seeing interesting things in your results, but it's not your study objective, go write a paper with it. And that paper comes out some other ways, because once you calculate your sample size, you would use the prevalence of a particular, your primary objective, your outcome. When you're doing secondary data analysis, it is not that power to calculate that was not the same. So people will take it. People that are using statistics to write policies, that are using papers to write programs, WHO, they know how to handle this kind of information. They know that, oh, this is just an hypothesis because it was not powered. Of course, you determine that the studies and sample size that you generated, if you had calculated the sample size for that sample size will be accurate. That's another pathway to show the validity of your paper. I hope I didn't confuse you, promise. But yes, brilliant thinking, and really glad to have you here. Bimpe Yusuf, oh geez, please can I take 5 more minutes of your time? I apologize, just to have Bimpe Yusuf ask a very brief question or brief contribution. Bimpe Yusuf, please unmute your mic. I only have 5 minutes to deal with the question. Bimpe Yusuf, yes, please.
Can you hear me, ma?
Very clear. Thank you, ma.
Oh, thank you, ma, for the teachings you've been giving us on this platform. Oh, bless you, ma. Yes, part of my questions have been answered. I want to ask question about writing a thesis into manuscript. A thesis has like 5 objectives. And so if I've written 2 out of it as a manuscript, the other 3, would I call the data a secondary data now?
No. Depending on, it's not a secondary data, it's a distinct objective. This is what a secondary data is. No, not secondary data, secondary analysis. Okay? So if your primary objective was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, remember that your sample size was calculated to answer that for those 3. Those are primary objectives. Except if when you define the primary objectives, the 5 primary objectives, you had already identified some as secondary objectives. So I don't know. But if that was what you did in your primary manuscript, this is the way. And this is the way. Oh, sorry, Bimpe. Sorry, but I hope you can hear me.
But this.
Let me go back. Let me go back so that we can maximize time. So, if when you defined your 5 objectives, they are clearly primary objectives. I know I did not discuss in this session what primary, secondary, and tertiary objective is. I did not discuss it here. But there are things and ways to define primary, secondary, and tertiary. Once you have that, and you are defined it as primary, this is the way you do it for manuscript Bimpe. I hope I'm okay to call you Bimpe.
Yes.
You first produce a master manuscript. A master manuscript, which describes the study procedure. Wait for it to be published. Then, for the other objectives, you refer, when you are now writing your methodology, you refer to the master manuscript. That this study, the methodology has been reported in this manuscript without reference. Then you just write the brief. If you don't do that, it will now look like plagiarism or splitting. So you write your master manuscript, publish it, and then for your objective 2, 3, 4, and 5, if you want to write them as separate papers, then you just refer to the master manuscript for your methodology. And then you can show in your result that you are generating distinct results because your objectives are actually distinct. When you're talking about a secondary analysis, what it means is that when I did my primary data collection, I collected 5 variables. Okay. However, I was testing variable A and B. But I collected C, D, and E as confounders. Okay. Now, in my secondary analysis, I want to use one of those confounders as an explanatory or outcome variable. That was not what it was designed for, but I have enough data to now test my confounder and see if it is associated with my explanatory or my independent variable. So in that case, that was not the primary objective. That was not why you calculated the sample size. That was not the variable you use to calculate your prevalence in your sample size. So you can write a paper on that, explaining the secondary analysis. But everybody would know that the outcome is only an hypothesis because it was never powered to answer that objective when you are calculating the sample size. But it's a very important way to maximize your data. So if you generated that large data for only 5 objectives, you can use it to write a lot more, because you have variables that you can now start to test the association, which now aligns with what Promise asked earlier.
Yes.
I hope this helps you, Bimpe.
Yes, ma.
Excellent.
Thank you, ma. Yes.
All right, Joshima, my sister. Let me take your last question. I'm already over time. Yeah, I only asked for 5 minutes and we're on top of the hour. Toshima, you want to ask something or contribute to something? Toby, can you unmute Toshima?
I've done it, ma.
All right, Toshima, anything? Otherwise, I'll close the session.
Yes. Thank you so much, Prof. I think you answered my question when you were answering that of Promise, but I want to be sure. Now, I collected data for a qualitative study, and from that, during the data collection, I encountered some challenges. And I want to develop those challenges into a manuscript, but it wasn't an original.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Do that. Excellent.
Okay.
Do it. That's a secondary. Yes, that is, and you write it up as a manuscript. That itself is, and you explain. This was it. These are the challenges, and excellent, very excellent piece of work. All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Florence. Please, nobody should put up hands after this. So.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much. Please, ma'am, my question is next on the chat. I have been looking forward to you answering that question, please, on the chat box.
Okay. And you want to ask it? You unmuted your mic. Ask the question.
All right. Supposing you are carrying out a research where you send audio messages to your participants, I realize that there's a way it is being contaminated somehow, because they play the audio messages for their friends who were not recruited into the research. So, like, I'm on family planning, like sending reminders for people to go for family planning services and all that, to adopt a method. I realized that because the jingles I sent in form of audio messages were so interesting that they started playing for people, and their friends had to go to the clinic.
Yes.
For I don't know how to prevent that contamination, because now more people were responding than what I expected and than what I recruited, my sample size.
But when you send the jingles to recruits, did you know the study participants? For example, when you send to recruit the jingle, then you say, take this, this is your code number for access.
Yes, ma, I did. I gave them a green tag.
So when they get there, even though 1,000 came, it is those ones that are green tags that are your study participants. That's the one you report on, the green tag.
I will just disregard the rest.
Yes. For your studio, because when you recruited the green tag, you recruited them using a probability sampling. That is for your study. You can collect the old data and do something else with it too. Data is never wasted. But for this study that you did, that you gave the jingle and gave them green tag, it is the green tag that is the study participant for the study. And you report on the green tag. The others, you can use that for some other things, but you do know that there was an ethics clearance for that others. That is where the problem would be.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Makes sense. Thank you, ma'am.
All right there. Thanks, everybody. I apologize that extended to 8 minutes is not our usual pattern. Have a wonderful morning, everybody, and see you next week. God bless. Bye.